Susan, don't you think it would be, as much as you need to destroy the plastic waste, and I'm in full favour of that, wouldn't it be better to do it outside of the oceans rather than introducing some, in quotes, foreign, unknown bacteria into the ocean that could in turn have a dramatic effect on the ocean and perhaps even do it more harm than good?
It's Louise, actually,
Louise.
but
I set this question because I wanted to have a controversial question. If we were to actually release an organism into the ocean that degraded the plastic that's already there, it would have huge implications for the materials we already use. With the could we, I think actually the degradation process would be quicker, but it would never be particularly quick. And with regards specifically to trying to do it outside, separate from this release, I mean that's the kind of techniques that I am doing now with the hyperaccumulating of metals with plants, and then doing the processing of it in an enclosed environment. But how do you do that in the ocean? How do you collect the plastic waste that's already there? Or are you talking about ignoring that and just treating the problem or preventing the problem any further than what we already have?
okay, thank you. So the next question we had was the back row up there, and then we're going to go up to the gallery.
Hello. I believe scientists are mostly optimistic and honest people. There is very little evil, mad science. I worry what will happen when this meets finance. In particular, they're thinking when you have got your genetically engineered gut flora made to match your genetically engineered crops or things like that, perhaps the question should be, would you be willing to have your genome modified to protect Monsanto's intellectual property?
Robert, that's specifically a food question enclosed in there.
It's a very interesting point, in as much that what derailed public acceptance of GM was largely driven by what went on in the private sector to introduce GM-based crops without a proper dialogue going on, and of course the acquisition of many of the germplasm and seed breeding companies under one roof was also seen as an undesirable move. I think that it is a very important point that we can have synthetic biology dialogue about what's going on in the public sector. I'm not so convinced that it's going on openly in the private. I mean, I don't know whether any of the other panelists want to comment on that.
Yeah, I can.
But that seems to be a very vulnerable point.
So the Translation Centre that I co-direct with my colleague Richard Kidney at Imperial College has a remit to develop with colleagues at King's College, social science colleagues. Some are, we call it responsible research innovation, which is an approach that most people understand can be very beneficial to address some of these human practice issues. So one of our tasks is to get around all the companies and try and talk to them about this, synthetic biology companies, okay? And that's been a really interesting challenge. In the SMEs that are small companies that are developing out of our center, and also SME, they're very much taking that on board. I mean, they are completely committed to that, because ultimately, if they manufacture or produce or do anything with synthetic biology, and the public, i.e. we do not buy or we don't purchase or we don't buy into what they're doing, their technology, then that company just goes under. So, you know, now the big multinationals, that's a completely different kettle of fish. But certainly in the SME world that I'm occupying at the moment, and also this startup world, there is incredible sensitivity to this issue. Because GM, as soon as you say GM in Europe, it's like, you know, just lighting a touch paper and stand back. It's such an emotive response to this subject. It's quite extraordinary, actually. And this emotive response we've somehow got to deal with, because actually, to be truthful, GM is one of the main future technologies that we will absolutely rely on, in my opinion, for survival, actually, if you not wanting to put too in a mood. But it's a very emotive thing, and I don't understand it. Walk up a plane in America, you're eating GM food, and I'm fine, but it's just an emotive thing, and we've got to somehow deal with that up front. So I don't know. I mean, so we are trying to do it in the small startup and SME world, very much so.
Do you think the figure of Monsanto as a target for many people's ire and problems with technologies like genetic modification, do you think that has been a hindrance to the development of the science itself? Anyone?
Absolutely.
Louise, you're nodding.
Yes, it goes back to the idea of we need to also look at the processes as well as the applications. We need to know, as soon as you try and, to be honest, I feel that anti-GM movement has not really been able to separate Monsanto from GM. And that anti-GM movement has actually shut down the technology to a point where it's only the bigger industries that have invested in it in previous decades. And what synthetic biology is trying to do is foster this environment of startups and new technologies, and actually, again with the IGEM competition, it's trying to allow other people to do it, just trying to broaden out the community that can use this technology, that's invested in this technology, so that we can have a bottom-up movement rather than a top-down.
Could I just interject that?
Of course.
Synthetic biology as a community is very much built, in the scientific community, very much built around open source. That's one of its prime founding drivers. It's because it came from ICT, it came from software engineers, and they work in open source. Now we can debate about open source, and we can have that debate. But open source in synthetic biology means that we want to make all of our parts available to everyone. And then intellectual property comes in the application space, or how you build those parts into some application. And that's kind of a key ethos in the community, and that's been driven quite strongly by pretty much major players, including IGEM, which is a major part of it. So open parts, open technologies. This technology, this needs to be shared by everyone, including amateur scientists, which I'm very keen on.
Okay. Should we have another question? So up on the top there. I can't really see you, so just go ahead.
Hi there. I was just wondering that I think all the topics we've looked at tonight are really significant, but which of the three in particular, food, health, and waste, do the panel feel is most pressing, both kind of with regards to which should receive the biggest proportion of limited funding, but also which one should I myself, but any young scientist, feel compelled to go towards to help solve the problems of that one, if that makes sense.
Well, he's asking you to defend your corners yet again. Proportional. Well, Robert's in first.
No. I think it's quite pragmatic in a way, because we know how to engineer microorganisms in a sophisticated way using synthetic biology principles that currently we cannot apply equally well to eukaryotic organisms like plants, crop plants, farm animals. That's a long way away. So I would be putting my money, and in terms of where the innovation will come, it's not so much, I think, on whether it's health or waste or food. It's around the practicalities of where you can use, in my opinion, organisms or devices under contained conditions which will address significant issues and ones which have a commercial bent to them, be they in any of those sectors. So I wouldn't say it's not so much the sector, it's more the way in which that technology can be deployed in the next few years.
I'm going to go for foundational technology, which is another sort of description of what Rob just said, which is that the field is based upon developing the tools and the technology, the software algorithms for design, the assembly protocols, the characterization protocols, the automatic robotics that will be characterizing the designs as you build them. And that foundational technology can be applied to many different application spaces. So for the next 5 years, foundational technology is going to be one of the most exciting areas.
Susan, who decides? So the two answers we just had so far is what's going to work the best, quickest. But who gets to decide?
Well, at the moment, it's through things like peer review amongst the scientific community, and there's a lot of commercial interest from different sectors. A lot of it is in the more kind of industrial biotech sector, I would say. So, you know, producing things that we already produce using other biotechnologies and using synthetic biology in there. So those kinds of commercial sectors are interested. And there's a lot of political interest. It's actually quite easy to find British politicians kind of claiming synthetic biology is somehow going to save the UK economy. So there's a kind of a very strong political motive to invest. But whether they're, you know,
in foundational technologies or in specific projects, though, which I think is what the questioner was asking. You know, should we focus on food, waste, or health?
Well, it's not for me to decide.
Well, then who is it?
Interesting.
You're not going to say me, are you?
No, I'm not going to say you.
So I'm not deciding.
No, you've got too much money already.
So you're not going to decide, you're
I'm
not
not
going to
deciding.
decide. Are these people going to decide?
Let's hope so.
It's going to be driven
Would
by...
you like to decide?
Who said no? Well, there was a sort of murmur. I was expecting everyone to say yes, democratically, yes, of course we should decide, but that was a less enthusiastic response than I was anticipating. Who wants to decide? This gentleman in the front row does.
You're experts.
Would you mind starting again so everyone could hear?
Yes, I'm a musician and I spend hundreds of hours practicing to do what I do. And you're experts at what you do like I'm an expert at what I do. I would not put it out for public opinion as to whether they like my C-sharp fingering with the right hand or the one with the left hand. Otherwise, we get opinions, if you ask the general public, which are built for answers to things like pop idol. And that's my art. I think we need to value our expertise in all fields and take advice from those at the top for what we should be doing in life.
On the other hand, you pay for all of this stuff, right? This is apart from the stuff which is privately funded. Most research in the UK comes from the public purse. Isn't that a counter-argument to the sense that only the people who know what they're doing should decide what we should do?
There's disagreement amongst the scientific community as well.
This gentleman in the front row has his hand up very quickly. Both of these two gentlemen wearing identical clothes.
But how would you stop our body from destroying the bacteria that you put to recognise the cells? Because it isn't part of our body, so wouldn't it just attack the cell, the bacteria?
It's a good and technical question.
Your body.
It's a
question.
Good technical question.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to answer that?
Yes. I guess I've got to, have I?
How do you avoid our very, very well-evolved immune system?
Indeed, from detecting the bacteria that you're going to put. No, that's a very, very good question. Quite right. So inside your tummy, you've got, billions of bacteria now, actually. And I guess you could, and you can eat yogurt, which has got live bacteria in. You can buy that in the shops now, called probiotics. And I think one idea would be that those probiotics, which are tolerated by your body, would be the source of trying to engineer, and you would engineer those that would then go into your tummy. That's one idea. There are more complicated ideas, some more fanciful ideas, but that's one idea.
Okay, can we move? Let's plough through some quick questions because I know lots of people have got their hands up. Now I said back road there, lady third in from the door, and then I think there's 2 to her left.
Thanks very much. I'm a doctor, and in medical research what we do is we do public-patient involvement. So we ask the public and we focus group them. But ultimately, as the musician has said, you use your expertise and understanding of the scientific community around you to focus your research. Is that not how you feel that we should be doing this? So it's a collaboration, but ultimately you rely on expertise to decide what goes first.
So, Susan, you mentioned the public consultation that occurred in 2009 and 10 and resulted in 5 or 6 questions, which you had on your slides. That was, what, 6 years ago? What's happening now in that sort of sphere?
As far as I'm aware, there's not a lot of larger scale kind of dialogue type things going on. There are 6 very large synthetic biology research centres in the UK now.
7, darling.
7. Oh, does yours count as one as well?
We've got 2.
And there's also a place where they specialise in training the next generations of synthetic biologists as well. So there's all these major centres all over the country. And as Paul has already mentioned, built into those are ideas around this kind of label of responsible research and innovation, and people are operationalising that in different kinds of ways. But one of the things that those groups are doing are exploring those kinds of ideas. So what are the models that we might use for having some of these discussions and debates? I think in the medical example, you're already working with things that are sort of either in kind of later stage clinical trials and or sort of at the point of application, and mostly the synthetic biology stuff isn't there yet to have that kind of model. But there are lots of other ways of engaging publics of various kinds.
Okay. So we move the mic. So I think we've only got time for a couple more, but if you could just move the mic 2 along, quick as you can.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, do any of you think that at some point in the future, synthetic techniques such as biobricks or something else that could be marketed as build your own organism will become commercialized for personal use in a similar way as 3D printers have been? And if that were to happen, would that be more ethically questionable?
Well, you can already buy glowfish in the United States. So they are fish that have been modified to contain bioluminescent molecules genetically, and they fluoresce, which is one application. They're not actually built themselves. You can actually buy them, but perhaps the rest of the panel, can you imagine these being commercialized to the point that anyone can do this themselves?
I can.
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
Almost certainly, yeah. I mean, I had a chemistry set when I was a kid, and used to try to blow things up, but I couldn't get it to work. But so I mean, why not have a molecular biology kit? I mean, it's a completely logical extrapolation, and I think there'll be where people will learn how to clone, move things around DNA. Kids will be able to really explore DNA, genetic phenotypes, all that. I completely see it. Now, clearly there are some issues about safety and release is the big word, but there'll be a perspective put on that. There are many organisms, bacterial organisms, which are perfectly safe, and those, and as long as one does the work and the research and the regulatory processes you go through, then I think it's quite possible that there will be molecular biology kits on the market.
You just might have to sign a lot of paperwork before you buy it.
Yeah.
I do believe that there might be a company exploring that space right now.
Oh, is that your company?
So, No. I thought
so that may be happening right now.
Yeah.
And indeed there is, as Paul and others have mentioned, that the IGEM competition is now extended to school, and we do genetic engineering at my school. From age 15 onwards. Yeah. Stuff that, as I was alluding to earlier, stuff that would have taken me 2 years to do 10 years ago.
Sorry, and public hack spaces as well.
And public hack spacing as well. So there's a growing underground movement.
There's one in Hackney called the DIY by London Hackspace, if you want to go and learn how to do synthetic biology.
So
they're not particularly underground.
I didn't say undergrounds. They do it in public. They do. So a question from the gentleman there.
Can I ask you a question? What do you think would be the greatest medium-term achievement of biotechnology? And then I'll tell you what I think my dream might be. In this very lecture theatre, about a year ago, we were talking about the understanding of the chemistry of photosynthesis. And it looks like it might be about a decade before we fully understand that. And if we could do that, maybe we could generate electricity directly from plants. Maybe we could make food from plants. But the point is, could we do that in the sea? I mean, we're talking here, we're shortage of agricultural land, we're shortage of fuel, we've got global warming problems as well. if we could use some modified plant that would produce electricity and food in the sea, we would solve a lot of our problems. Do the panel agree?
Does the panel agree?
There's quite a large there's an active research program at the University of Copenhagen doing exactly that, which is basically hardwiring the electron transport processes of photosynthesis into driving other chemical reactions in the cell. So it's a step away from what you're describing. I think they're largely using model organisms, many of which won't be marine, but there's no reason why you couldn't move to a marine-based life form to engineer. So all those thoughts are perfectly plausible. I guess they're just one of several options, though, for using direct coupling of electrical energy from photosynthesis into driving a whole series of other chemical reactions that need those sorts of energy inputs in the cell to make metabolism more efficient.
Yes, my view is that photosynthesis is although these are definitely areas worth exploring, photosynthesis itself is terribly inefficient. Plants are terribly inefficient at converting sunlight into glucose. So, worth exploring, but I don't imagine that would be a transformative tech in the next decade or so. Anyone else?
There are people at Caltech working on the artificial leaf, which is the metal cluster that's in photosystem 2, which splits water. So they're using inorganic chemistry to create the right geometry of the metal cluster so that they can create hydrogen. And that's looking very, very promising. And there are a lot of people, that's sort of bio-inspired, if you like, rather than synthetic biology.
Right, so let's see if we can get 3 more questions in. Is that clock slow or fast? Slow. So we're over time already. The gentleman with the...
Quite a few at the top as well.
Okay, so... Do you want to stay? 2 more questions? 3 more questions. Right, okay, gentleman in the front row there.
Well, I've got a question specifically for Paul.
Oh, no.
And it's about one of the what-ifs he said, and it's when you said the macrophages attacking the cells and bacteria in the body, like flu is a very adaptive virus, and every month there's new, or every year there's new vaccines for flu. You could, but financially, if you have to keep making new changed macrophages for different cells that are adapting to the changes, couldn't that be financially very hard to do?
Yes.
Do you want to come down here and do my job? Because frankly, that was a much better question than any I've asked tonight. Are we just going to go with yes? I mean, it's a question.
Well, no, it's a great question. I mean, you're absolutely right. So a lot of the technologies I described are actually, extremely, they're expensive and they're bespoke to individuals. So, how would you roll that out across a whole population in a national health service that we have? It would be extremely expensive and potentially prohibitive. But we've got to try and work on the fundamentals of those technologies and see if we can translate them into, as you quite rightly pointed out, economically viable therapies. And I think it's a great question, but you're absolutely right.
Right, so I'm going to do one here and then one from the gods, because we can't really see them, but try not to neglect them.
So Stephen Pinker, who was here just a couple of weeks ago, he claimed in the Boston Globe article that bioethicists need to get out of the way of scientific progress. I wonder, is there any feeling within the scientists on the stage whether or not that bioethics is getting in the way?
Oh, it's been a long day.
Nice easy one to end on there. Is Susan getting in the way of you 3?
I'm not a bioethicist anyway. I think they'd struggle to get in the way, seeing as they're actually usually brought in right at the end.
Not in synthetic biology,
I don't think that's fair.
There aren't that many. Are there many bioethicists?
There are loads of them.
Are they?
Well,
they don't come to our meetings.
Oh, okay. Bioethicists. No, I mean...
there are lots of different kinds of social scientists involved, not particularly bioethicists, actually, which is kind of a field that grew up very much in relation to the Human Genome Program in the US. But when those kind of ideas of involving social scientists arrived in Europe, it manifested itself in a much more kind of diverse ecology of people getting involved. I'm sure Paul thinks I regularly get in his way, but he knows it's good for him.
There's a weird sort of thing going on the stage here, which I don't want to focus on, so I'm going to turn to Robert and Louise here. Do bioethicists get in your way?
I think they phrase questions which, if they're not phrased at the beginning of the project, would be posed later on. So in as much that I think we've made enough mistakes of technology that's fallen over at the last hurdle because of regulatory or ethical concerns, better to ask it up front. Again, I think it reflects itself, and scientists, I think, are much more open to that way of thinking now than we were 10 years ago. I certainly am. So I think there's a mind shift there in where we're coming from.
I hate to admit it, but the social science contributions to the growing field of synthetic biology have been actually very significant, really important, and very impactful. And I say that with bated, bleeding breath.
People are beginning to leave because we were meant to finish a few minutes ago, but I'm going to ask for one more question from the top there because I've been neglecting you. So the gentleman in the white shirt behind the very bright light.
Hello. My question is, when in the initial talks, there were several mentions of displacement of other technologies due to new biosynthetic technologies. My question is, for example, mobile phone screens, there are chemicals that are difficult to produce. They are only produced in the Far East. And however, if a new technology for producing touchscreens was created, we'd all jump on it and we say, yay, cheap touchscreens. And I suspect the majority of us wouldn't think at all about the people in the Far East who are displaced because of it. What makes this a different issue such that this is now something to be worried about, whereas I think in something that's more hotly competitive financially, we just wouldn't think about it?
I personally think it's the word genetic modification, GM. I think that word is, at least in Europe and the UK, is so emotive that unless we really embrace human practice and considerations about the technology we're doing, it just won't be accepted.
I would actually say it's less about the phrase GM. I think it's more just to do with bio.
Okay, bio.
It's kind of, there's something about us as biological beings means that we make quite a big distinction between other biological things and the material world. So, our mobile phones are material objects. A lot of what we've been talking about here, not always, but a lot of it is biological stuff. And I think it is interesting that we then treat it very, very differently, actually. I mean, I'm not saying whether we should or shouldn't. Maybe we should care more about the materials in our phones.
There was an IGEM project last year, which was a bioremediation project to recover rare earth metals for that exact reason.
Mobile phones, yeah.
I think was that Imperial?
No. But
Edinburgh? Anyone? No,
I can't remember. But I didn't know.
Louise, did you have?
I really wanted to respond to that point actually. So the nanoparticles that I'm making with the bacteria are potentially those that you can't make through other synthetic methods. So I'm actually really intrigued by this idea of the new nanoparticles that I'm examining. How are they different? Could they have the potential to replace rare earths? For me, it's actually about we spoke about displacing indigenous farmers. That's got nice. If you envisage that farmer, he has a good standard of living. You wouldn't, that's quite I don't know, maybe nobody else agrees, but it sounds like a way of life that you want to continue. If you see the photos of people working in mines where they're getting the rare earths, it's horrific. Nobody wants to live in those kind of conditions. Nobody wants to experience those kind of conditions.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up now before everyone leaves and it's just us four, us five talking amongst each other. Let's just do the poll again. Let's have the lights up to see if there's been any seismic shift in people's views on the 4 questions that we asked at the beginning. Could you put the lights up for me? We've got to do this quickly because people are leaving. Quickly, sit down. That row, sit down. Robert was first. Would you eat plants or animals? No, that's lower. That's the other way. Would you eat animals or plants, derived food with scientifically evidenced unique health benefits, which have been prepared with clearly labeled processes that involve synthetic biology? So, who would? Yay. Who wouldn't? Well, I think there's been a minor swing. So I had it done as 90-10. I'd say that was 95-5. Right, Louise's question, should we engineer microorganisms for use in our oceans to degrade man-made plastic waste? Who thinks we should? And who thinks we shouldn't? I'm going to go with 50-50 again, so unmoved. Are you the same people? Has anyone changed their mind?
Change opinion, definitely.
This woman changed her mind. Thank you. Paul's question, would you be happy to have your genome edited to ensure the genetic well-being of your children? Would you, if you would, raise your hand now. And if you wouldn't, I think that's
definitely
I think
shift.
that's been a shift away from you.
Yeah, ooh.
And Susan's question about focusing on the process rather than the outcome, the product. So who thinks we should focus on the process? Who thinks we should focus on the process? And who thinks we should focus on the product? What do we think? Roughly the same. So, Paul, you lose. No, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Thank you for being patient, because we're now about 15 minutes over and you're desperate to leave. But before you leave, that row, sit down. Would you offer your thanks to our panel, Louise, Robert, Susan, and Paul.